Well, thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Listening to it, I was reminded of a story about the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie. In response to a similarly glowing introduction, he noted that he would pray for the soul of the introducer for being such a flatterer, and he would pray for his own soul for enjoying it so much. So I feel much like the Archbishop. I'd like to begin by thanking the Richard Ivey School of Business for this high honor. And I'd also like to thank Don Johnson, better known as DK, one of the school's more illustrious graduates, for asking me to receive it. Especially, I'd like to thank my wife, Beth, for actively encouraging me to speak here tonight. Having received many honors and awards over the years, and with my business career having ended on February 17th of this year, it was not my intention to do so. But as you can see, she prevailed again. As this dinner recognizes leadership, it seemed a reasonable topic would be my thoughts gained from almost 50 years in what Theodore Roosevelt called the arena. Over those years, and as some in the room know, I observed that a business leader always has intelligence, judgment, and courage. These personal characteristics appear to come from various sources. Intelligence comes from God or a lucky gene or whatever you want to call it. Judgment comes from the world, where good judgment comes mainly from making or observing bad judgment. Courage comes from within. It is what is provided by the individual alone. These three characteristics, intelligence, judgment, and courage, probably apply to accomplished people in many fields. But in business, a field in which I have some familiarity, the great leaders build on all of them in the process of becoming great. Intelligence becomes strategic thought leadership, while judgment and courage convert into business leadership and great people management. On thought leadership, it's just as crucial as it may be obvious that the leader must know where he wants to take a business and why there and nowhere else. He needs to think about and understand the dynamics or economics of his industry and his business, and the political and social environment in which he is operating. Especially, he needs the input of his key people. I have never believed in the cult of the omnipotent leader. One must involve people in order to devise a strategy that works, for people will support what they help to create. Involvement, however, does not necessarily mean consensus. The pursuit of consensus many times leads to irrelevance, as process becomes a substitute for purpose. Sooner or later, the leader must decide where the business is going to go. Involving the people who will get it done just makes the getting it done part that much easier. The book Alice in Wonderland has many instructive passages, regardless of what Lewis Carroll may have been smoking when he wrote it. One of my favorites applies to leadership and knowing where you want to take a business. One day, Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. "Which road do I take?" she asked. "Where do you want to go?" was his response. "I don't know," Alice answered. "Then," said the cat, "it doesn't matter." But as a leader, it does matter. You must pick the right road, and you must have the support of your team in going down that road. By the way, there's an implicit contract going on here between you and your team. You respect them by involving them. They respect you by supporting the decision. To me, the essence of genuine leadership is to share power with people rather than display power over people. Thought leadership is very important. Vision is essential to leadership. If you don't know where you're going and why you want to go there, you're just like Alice. But my experience is that thought leadership only works when it is linked to the other two parts, business leadership and people management. That linkage provides the proof to the admonition of Albert Einstein. He noted that vision without execution is a hallucination. Now, in business leadership, I think it is completely described by the expression, execution is strategy. Many people can figure out what is the right thing to do, but very few can get it done. They may have thought leadership, but they don't have business leadership. Some years ago, Fortune magazine did a major article entitled "Why CEOs Fail." It examined, as I recall, business failures over the previous decade. In virtually every case, failure was not because the CEOs did not know what to do, it was because they could not get it done. Getting it done requires real people management. And I only know one way to do that, and that is by involving people in decision making and then giving them incentives to accomplish the goals. 2 words: involve, incentivize. I agree fully with the nameless economist who said, all economics is about incentives. The rest is bunk. When I was president of Loblaw Companies, I was many times accused of running the business out of my back pocket. And I guess in many respects, that's what I did. We had no book on policy and rules, but everybody knew the rules and what was expected of them in every respect and in every region. We had no organization chart, but everybody knew the organization and how it worked. The business was not built on systems and technology, even though I did have a degree in engineering and one from a lesser-known business school. They were important, but they were secondary. The business was built on competent people, each in his own way, pulling in the same direction. The glue was constant communication, constant discussion, and constant travel. In my case, getting on to 5 million miles in those 25 years. All of us, face to face, kept it together and humming. And we all had financial incentives. Cash for meeting short-term individual goals, and stock options for meeting what I saw as the long-term communal objectives. Let me just give you a short story on how it all worked. One of our competitors competed in many markets with us. One day decided that they would go on a bit of a price campaign at the same time, same day, in Nova Scotia, Ontario, and I think it was Alberta. By the end of the day, we had matched them in every market and had taken down our controlled labels by the same percentage amount and stopped the price engagement in its tracks. The reason I tell that story as to how it all worked is that I never knew it was happening. But the people in the Maritimes, in Ontario, and in the West, they knew what to do. We talked about it many times. You match the price. You take the control label below it and stay there forever if you have to, because we would be making a positive contribution, a positive profit on the category, while the other people would be losing on the items. The main thing was I never knew. And all of this really speaks to the decentralization of a business. Empowerment. But it takes self-confidence for any leader to disperse power. Jim Collins wrote in Good to Great that great came from the leader having professional will and personal humility. I always thought he had it backwards, and that personal will and professional humility was the way to go in running a business. To decentralize requires the leader to submerge much of his ego. Maybe that's a contradiction in terms, but there it is. In a world of increasing complexity, called by some the 1-year decade or the 10-year century, leaders are increasingly dependent on their subordinates for good information. Today, people at all levels in the business have access to the same factual information as do the people at the top. The emotional response to that information is what's important. Those in the business who speak about that emotional response and so speak truth to power, and leaders who listen to it, are an unbeatable combination. One that just does not and cannot exist in a centralized command and control environment. The world does not move on logic. The world moves on emotion. The decentralized business links the two, logic with emotion, and so gets the best of both. After the upheavals of the 60s and the early 70s, I realized that command and control was on the way out. To decentralize was the way of the future. Even more so do I believe that today. Functional, centralized command and control organizations are dinosaurs. They come from a time when deference mattered more than merit. You're going to have to bear with me because I'm fighting one of those winter things called a cold. Much of my career at Loblaws, Weston, and BC has been with businesses that weren't working so well and making them work. How to summarize what I learned about leadership and management style from those experiences can best be done, I think, from two quotes. One from the greatly misunderstood Niccolò Machiavelli. There's nothing to take in hand more perilous to conduct or more uncertain of success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order in things. And from George Patton, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what you want to achieve, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. That the principal requirement of leadership is thought leadership may be self-evident. The leader must know what are the central issues or the central issue to be addressed. His business leadership is in presenting, then listening, and modifying his thoughts as necessary. Then he depends on his people management skills to have the issues resolved. That's about it. That's what I consider leadership to be all about. You present, you listen, you modify, and then your people move about and get it done. For me, leadership began when I was put in charge of refining at Canada's largest sugar refinery as a young man, aged 26. 2 older men had held the job. One was fired, the second had a nervous breakdown. The product losses were 3 to 4 times what they should have been, and it was running at about 60% of design. The product losses were caused by inaccurate measures of input, the throughput problems by the designers confusing percolation with filtration. But let me say it was not difficult to be the thought leader in that instance. But to deal with people 20 to 30 years my senior to get it done taught me very quickly the role of people management. Knowing what to do was important, but it was not enough. It was all about getting it done that counted. Some years later, age 38, at the start of my Loblaws presidency, we had a decrepit asset base, a dispirited management, no leadership position in any market, very little cash flow, and no access to financing. Other than that, the business was in great shape. Back before some of you were born, and only those of you with a long memory would remember when Loblaws was the sick man of the supermarket industry. What was the fundamental issue? Where to begin? Where was the thought leadership and the business leadership required? Well, we determined the fundamental issue was cash. First, how to get some, and then how to use it. The first time I met Garfield Weston, his son, the present chairman, Galen Weston, we went to have lunch with Garfield Weston. On the way up, Galen said to me, "I can't control my father. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know what he's going to say. Nobody can control him. Only my mother could, and she's now dead. The only thing I can tell you is when he leans over and says to you, 'Tell me, Dick,' that's the only thing he's interested in that day. And you're on your own." So we had a lovely lunch up on Country Lane, and we're having a good talk about many things. And then he leaned over to me and said, "Tell me, Dick." And the question was, what's the single most important word in business? And I said to myself, has it all come down to this? One word. Well, I said to him, can I think about that for a little while? Take all the time you want. I knew I wasn't going to get out of there that day until I gave him a word or the word. So I said to him, I think the most important word is cash. With that, he stood up, he took his napkin, wiped his face, dropped the napkin down on the table, turned to his son and said, "This young man and I will never have any trouble." And as it turned out, we didn't. We never did. So our concentration on cash started in Canada by realizing that payables were a function of purchases and not of inventory. even though it was payables coverage of inventory that appeared on the balance sheet. If we could close stores with no decline in total sales, then we could turn that entire store inventory into cash. Then if we could buy as one business rather than as many, or if we could lease fixtures instead of leasing stores, then we could begin to generate some cash to invest in the long and winding road to recovery. In the United States, our asset base was even more decrepit, literally falling apart. It was so large relative to our ability to generate cash from it that even the base could not be renewed in any reasonable time frame. In every market, we were being outspent, which meant our assets were getting worse every year relative to our competition. The only solution was to exit, and exit we did, all 14 divisions. It took well over 15 years because for so many years we had no or not enough equity base to accommodate the write-offs. But every penny we pulled out of the U.S., we added to our cash in Canada and invested it all, mostly on stores and stores that we would own. Cash became the pivot around which all else in the future success of Loblaw companies rotated. But there was much else. We needed reasons to come to our stores, and that realization led to the development of our own, and in later cases, unique products. The decision to restrict the business to Canada only meant many formats: superstores, supermarkets, no frills, ethnic specialty, franchised independent. Without those many formats, our growth would have topped out very early. Formats and products, products and formats built Loblaw companies. We needed reasons to come to our stores, and that realization led to the development of our own, and in later cases, unique products. The decision to restrict the business to Canada only meant many formats: superstores, supermarkets, no frills, ethnic specialty, franchised independent. Without those many formats, our growth would have topped out very early. Formats and products, products and formats built Loblaw companies. Now, the decision to be only in Canada was strategic and fundamental and absolutely right for its time. But it became increasingly restrictive over time as our market share grew to be as large as number 2, number 3, and number 4 competitors combined. After all, the more you increase your market share, the more you approach the growth rate of the total market in any business. And food is low growth. So our success led us to a bad place. The only solutions were to enlarge into other mass merchandise retail businesses in Canada, to move the supermarket business into other countries, or to sell. My route was to sell, but it was not to be. Early in my remarks, I described the organization and the culture and the people management that evolved at Loblaw. We became the largest. We created more unionized jobs than any other company in Canada in the decade of the 90s. We were recognized as one of the top 10 mass merchandisers in the world. But perhaps the most satisfying recognition came when 3 separate organizations, AC Nielsen, the Union Bank of Switzerland, and perhaps most significantly, the United States Department of Agriculture, all declared with different methodologies and independent of one another that Canadians paid less for their food than any country in the world. As we had the lion's share in a country with a small population and a large geography and not exactly a long growing season, that recognition confirmed to us that we had done it the right way. And so the thought and business leadership in Loblaw evolved from cash to products to formats. And the people management revolved always around involvement and incentives. Well then, what about thought and business leadership as applied to George Weston Limited? The time I was made president in 1996, Weston consisted of 3 divisions: resources, food processing, and food retailing. It was clear that resources, pulp and paper, and lumber, and fishing were bit players in a global industry, one in which the replacement of just one paper machine would take up all our free cash flow for many years. And fishing was oversupplied with processing and undersupplied with fish. So resources was let go. Once again, as in Loblaw, it started with cash, and the business leadership was in making it food retail, or Loblaws, and food processing, essentially baking. The ultimate success at George Weston Limited was in people management. The closer linking of processing and retail, especially at the services and financial level, and the separation of food processing's operations from its former centralized command and control structure to a decentralized, divisionalized business. The incentive programs tied it all together. Now, my almost 5 years as president of both Loblaws and Westons were among the most intellectually stimulating and certainly the most financially rewarding to me and all those working for me in both companies who were on a wide-ranging incentives plan. From assuming the Weston presidency in 1996 until finishing in 2002, the value of the company increased from $2 billion to almost $17 billion. Now to BCE. The collapse of the BCE deal was bittersweet. On the one hand, the shareholders lost the spectacular $42.75 share price. On the other, a Canadian icon has remained on the public market. As far as I'm concerned, the more Canadian companies driven by decisions made in Canada, the better. At BCE, a near hysterical level of criticism was directed at the company, especially its CEO, during my time as chairman. Every move was second-guessed, especially amongst many others, the sale of Yellow Pages and Bell Globe Media, which no thoughtful analysis today could suggest were strategically incorrect, underpriced, or ill-timed. Probably the low point of market and media comment was reached in the proposed takeover. Canada is a small financial market with a very small private equity component and a 57% Canadian ownership requirement in telecommunications companies. And yet, even with those restrictions, we were able to attract 3 bidders, and the $42.75 share price made it the largest LBO in world history. But the reaction on Bay Street and in the media was uniformly negative, as if we were not following some set rule book or defined process. It seemed to us that we were being asked to sell at a lower price, or to sell to someone of their choosing and not to serve our shareholders, stakeholders. All I can say about our efforts is to parody Churchill: some result, some process. When I became chair, BCE faced challenges from a balance sheet and control perspective. It had an uncompetitive cost structure, and it was technologically disadvantaged when compared with the competition. Today, Bell has solid free cash flow, strong balance sheet, including over $3 billion in cash, and the ability to make the kind of network investments that will ensure its competitiveness going forward. That all that could be achieved in 6 years is a tribute to the ability and steadfastness of the CEO of the time. The thought leadership was in returning Bell to its communications core. The business leadership and people management segments were addressed when it became clear that with the strategic direction of the business established and with growing financial strength and a game plan for its completion, operational and implementation skills were needed. So it was almost 4 years ago that key people to lead the business into its operational future were hired, and they are still there today. I probably don't need to remind you that while building BCE strategically, financially, and operationally, almost 3 of those 6 years were taken up with the sideshow of income trusts and the proposed buyout of the company. Tenacity, thy name is Michael. Tonight, I've tried to categorize my thoughts on leadership and then bring them to life with some examples from my own career. As I indicated earlier, much of my career has been with businesses that weren't working and making them work. To do that required 3 stages in sequence: save, secure, grow. And I found it was important. Indeed, it was vital to let no power or persuasion deter me from that sequence. These steps require different skill sets, and it is the rare leader or chief executive who has the skills to think through and then implement them all. Save always involves cash. Simply stated, if you don't get it, you won't survive. Secure involves perhaps the most important of leadership skills, the development of a competitive advantage. Every great company has one or has many. Loblaws certainly did. Competitive advantage drives sales, and sales drive earnings. What is seen is the grow part of secure and grow. But without the unseen, the secure part, the development of competitive advantage, sales and earnings growth just does not take place. I'd like to give you just a few random thoughts on what I learned about leadership over the years. Each of them played a role in my career, either directly or indirectly. Positive change takes time. To go to baseball, home run balls are rare. After all, Babe Ruth struck out 20 times for every home run he hit. And game changers, so-called game changers, come around about as often as Halley's Comet. It took many years to get Loblaws and Westons right. Contrast that with the recently reported average tenure of a CEO, which is about 4 years. Negative change can happen very quickly. A year or 2 of ineffective leadership is all it takes, maybe even less. No business ever retrenched or cost reduced itself to greatness. Costs are important, but it is sales that drive growth, and growth leads to greatness. perhaps the most important impact of sales is on morale. Everybody in the business understands sales. They may not understand things like discounted cash flow and return on equity, but they sure understand sales. Show me a business with slumping sales and great morale, and you will be showing me the first one I've ever seen. I'm convinced that the definition of great morale is simple. It's a rising sales curve. It's not complicated. As a leader, you regularly assess your people. Many leaders, however, don't realize that their people assess them every day. They assess on growth, but they assess mostly on who you hire, who you fire, who you promote, who you don't promote. Do you reward performers, or do you reward politicians? Do you reward results, or do you reward rhetoric? Your people know the good ones. It's your credibility that's at stake here. With good decisions on people, you earn the respect that gives you the right to lead. A leader at the top makes only a few decisions in a year, but they're the ones that can affect the future of the business. So they must all be right, and all means 100%. Once the decisions are made, the words to describe a leader become steadfastness and perseverance. Call it what you will. My late friend Harrison McCain called it constancy of purpose. Leaders have these characteristics because their decisions are long-term in nature, almost by definition. Their decisions don't change every quarter or every year or because of external criticism or internal politics. The answer to having money is not in spending less, but in making more. Investment is not only the elixir of growth, but it also shows your customers and your people that you respect them, that you're not in it for the short term or milking the results of their efforts and loyalty. Investment means adding fixed costs, which is not bad. Fixed costs infer commitment. Fixed costs infer a longer time frame perspective. Fixed costs infer sweating your assets and not sweating your people. There are a great many values to be derived from playing team sports in your youth, but the greatest is in learning to make the other guys play your game and never to play theirs. It's the same in business. Now, there are, of course, so many aspects to leadership that any list of thoughts can never be complete. But that list of 7 should suffice for now, at least for one evening. Finally, after all this talk regarding leadership and what I've learned about it, let me end with Norman Schwarzkopf. Leadership is about strategy and character. If you need to be without one, be without strategy. I completely agree. I've enjoyed tonight, and I hope you have as well. Thanks very much.